There is something undoubtedly intriguing about sounds that make you feel uncomfortable. The curiosity provoked from our morbid fascination with all things unsettling in nature. Whether it's bizarre imagery, tragic backstories, or simply the erratic sounds of the music itself, let us take a look today at 13 of the most disturbing albums you can stumble upon on the internet. For copyright purposes, I'm not going to have the actual music discussed playing in the background of this video, so feel free to check out the description of this video later on, as I'll link all of the albums there for you. So turn off the lights, grab a comfy sweatshirt as we explore some music that will, without a doubt, pique your curiosity, music that is simply a search bar visit away. Maynard Vale, Bodycount. Pounding and punishing. Music producer and audio engineer Thomas Ferrero unleashed Bodycount in April of 2019. This debut LP, released under the name Maynard Vale, scratches its way at you with 12 tracks, devoid of fillers, ambient interludes, and other mindless garbage, as Ferrero sums up perfectly on the Bandcamp listing. Bodycount is an industrial lover's playground with a blend of goth and metal. The tracks sway and dance like corroded pipes and decayed sheetrock in a wind tunnel. Almost all of the instruments on here sound like different sized metal objects smacking against one another. Bodycount is loud, but very simple in its anatomy. Sounds are amplified and then pressed down with distortion to give a top layer of crunched, biting, no bullshit techno, as I like to call it. Most of the tracks average around 5 minutes on here, and like Ferrero said about being void of mindless garbage, the tracks get right to the point, with forceful drum beats starting right away and carrying the song from start to finish, with no interruptions nor effects that would sugarcoat the actual meat of the track. Track number 5, From Body to Body, is a great example of this. Track number 7, 12 Regions, does this as well. The world of Bodycount presents an abandoned city, recently mowed down by some sort of mechanical army. A city of thousands, now reduced to nothing but harsh winds brushing against the mountains of debris. A barbaric world in black and white. Boards of Canada, Geogadi. The dangers of being too caught up in nostalgia. I can't help but feel like some sort of entity is judging me as I listen to Scottish electronic music duo Boards of Canada, specifically their 2002 release of Geogadi. Boards of Canada is a group I can sadly admit I have never really spent too much time diving into, and every time I'm recommended an album or project of theirs to check out from friends who swear by them, I'm reminded of how stupid I am for not listening to them sooner, because their work is definitely chilling, to say the least. Known for their musical themes of nostalgic memories, childhood, and nature, brothers Michael Sanderson and Marcus Eoin, I don't know if I'm saying that right, I am sorry, threw a monkey wrench into fans' expectations as Geogadi presented gloomier undertones than their previous releases, yet it still had that charm of making you feel like you were a kid again. Throughout the album, there is without a doubt a feeling that something just isn't quite right, and everything may not be as it seems. And nowadays, all these years later, as we find ourselves in a time where technology is ever growing and life is getting more and more complicated day in and day out, trying to find happiness from past experiences can prove to be just a waste of time, as we allow the potential of new experiences and excitement brush right past us. Geogadi reminds me of that concept, the idea of our society's willingness to constantly romanticize the past and not live in the actual moment, and the doom that awaits us when we all realize it's just too late. Consisting of 23 tracks, Geogadi is an hour-long, chemically infused psychedelic enlightenment from start to finish. With sonic melodies and varying levels of effects and filters, songs are in a tug-of-war with one another. At 1 second, it's happy-go-lucky, the next, some goopy vocal overlay will squeeze its way into the track. Track number 16, The Devil is in the Details, is a great example of this never-ending switcheroo of feel-good nostalgia to all-out creepiness. The album was described by Sanderson as a record for some sort of trial by fire, a claustrophobic, twisting journey that takes you into some pretty dark experiences before you reach the open air again. Many of you may recognize the iconic background music of the classic webtoon Salad Fingers on this album. The just over 30-second song, Beware the Friendly Stranger, is still to this day one of the most uneasy and squirmish songs I think I've ever heard. Mark Richardson of Pitchfork wrote a wonderful article on this album back in 2002 and summed it up perfectly with, "But where the warbles once seemed designed to evoke the sensation of strained memory, the distortions now have a disturbing undercurrent, suggesting that something frightening might lie beneath the surface." Steve Roden, Forms of Paper. Considered to be the first ever instance of lowercase music, a genre which explores what would happen if you digitally amplify, manipulate, and loop tiny and quiet sounds to create new worlds and soundscapes. Steve Roden's Forms of Paper is a 54-minute and 1 second long musical work that is, you guessed it, just him handling different types of paper. Yep, a almost entire hour of him moving, brushing, maybe crumpling if he feels like it, pieces of paper. It really makes me feel bad for, like, ants, for example. Imagine how loud everyday things we do must sound to them. Lowercase music proudly promotes the sounds we deem forgettable, everyday things that are so routine to us it almost feels like they don't even register as sound. And when these sounds are brought to a greater life, repeated to sound like we are listening to them in an echoing trench, the sound definitely becomes quite unnerving when you listen to it for a solid amount of time with some really high quality headphones. The genre is definitely rule shattering. I mean, you really have to think outside the box to somehow see this as even an idea, and Forms of Paper being the first is just another reason it makes me put it on this list. The term lowercase music was coined by Roden himself, and Forms of Paper was originally commissioned by the Hollywood branch of the Los Angeles Public Library for an exhibition titled 6 Degrees, Art in the Libraries. A 10-minute version of the track was played softly, continuously, for a month from 8 speakers atop a pedestal covered with pages from discarded library books, blending into the already established atmosphere of what a library should be. It's the same thing as putting speakers by a beach and having it constantly play waves, or putting a stereo system around a bonfire that plays nothing but a crackling fire. It's also exquisitely bizarre and unnecessary, and hey, I find it fascinating. Nurse with Wound, a Sucked Orange. Sounding like you're trapped in the middle of a haunted antique shop at 3:33 in the morning, the jolting labyrinth of sounds begging for your attention within 1989's A Sucked Orange is a mangled trip and a half. Right off the bat, you know this thing is going to have absolutely no shame with its lack of timing or any sort of other traditional music structure, as British musician Stephen Stapleton, the name behind Nurse with Wound, dumps a goodie bag of spiky, repetitious musical surrealness right on top of your head. I really don't even want to call the tracks on here songs, but instead devilish experiments NWW forces down your ears. The track Scissor Rock Bicycle Revelation erects a poorly constructed robot struggling to come to life right before our very ears. The clunking and rattling of metallic bones just trying to stand up and operate correctly. The less than a minute long track titled A Precise History of Industrial Music is nothing but a cash register printing out the longest receipt ever, all coming to a screeching end with a sound so sharp it'll rattle the right side of your brain. A Sucked Orange is to music what WarioWare was to video games, quick macro bites of content that test your speed and subconscious. There is barely a breath of air on here, and when there is, like on the track This Piano Can't Think, where Stapleton all of a sudden throws us into a jolly saloon of sorts with its bare ragtime piano, it'll only be a couple of seconds until he picks you back up and throws you into another disfigured world he wants you to see. This album can come off as annoying for some, understandably. It really is just a test of how much you can take of this expansive audible toy box Stapleton has in his mind. The track Rocket Morton, for example, is just some dude saying Rocket Morton over and over again, stacking on top of one another to make some sort of echo jams effect, but without any reverbs or filters, causing it to be harsh, crisp, and jarring. And to boot, there's 2 of these tracks on here, a part 1 and part 2 that are pretty much the exact same thing, so be ready to listen to Rocket Morton for over 7 minutes straight if you plan on listening to this album all the way through. All in all, this album is a mess and will definitely leave you feeling nauseous if you dare listen to it straight through. The album art perfectly demonstrates the stubborn will of the album, this desire to constantly mix and match random objects in musical form, and shove them right into your face. Nothing makes sense here. Hallmark 87, Atrium. Atrium, similar to Fantasy's Vacant Places, is a vaporwave album that explores the darker, more sinister side of Mallsoft. While many releases in Mallsoft explore the grand, glistening lifestyles of shopping guilt-free with a $1 billion limit credit card, Atrium goes beyond the shiny surface level and digs deep into the emptiness hyperconsumerism brings upon its misguided customers. Hallmark 87 places us in an extraordinary, large building of sorts, and whether it is a mall or some sort of corporate skyscraper, it is without a doubt late at night, and you will feel like you're not supposed to be there. It's you and maybe one or two other janitors long in the distance, seeming to clean the same tile over and over again. Oh, and what happens when you get to the top of this structure? Will some ill-witted kingpin introduce you to your doom? Or will you just hit another empty room, signifying the never-ending world of walls and freshly mopped floors you find yourself in? Atrium shows how the everyday of the future can be just as terrifying, yet inspiring and hopeful. Hallmark 87, co-owner of the lesser-known but very talented Nightlight Tapes label on Bandcamp, is an expert at exploring landscapes, bringing the feelings one may get when being the only one in the vicinity of set location. This feels like a real place, and we will more than likely see it come to fruition within our lifetime. For Mallsoft fans looking for an eerily ambient experience, take a trip over to the Atrium before some unknown spirit forces you to. Current 93, I Have a Special Plan for This World. The experimental post-industrial release known as I Have a Special Plan for This World by the English band Current 93 isn't technically an album, but more so a long-form single combining the spoken word of a poem by author Thomas Ligotti with the bending of sound done by the band themselves, creating this found sound, hopeless wasteland for the poem to feast upon. Narrated by the band member David Tibet, the project goes back and forth from audible narration to this warbly, acidic, sped up and reversed style of speaking, and I feel like every time Tibet clicks the tape after his speaking, he plays it in some unnerving outer body language to speak to the demon standing behind us, hovering over us as we progress through 20 nerve-wracking minutes of this mind-numbing speech. I like to think of that demon as whatever that is on the cover of this thing. Everything spoken is laid upon these metamorphic synths, which will gradually glow and grow, louder and louder throughout the spoken word. After listening to its hypnotizing, nightmarish repeated lines over and over again, you're going to want to clean your ears out with a Q-tip or something. I'm worried I'm going to hear Tibet now when I dream at night. For any vinyl collectors watching, there was an additional special release of I Have a Special Plan for This World back in 2007. 3 test presses were made featuring signed and personalized sleeves in gold ink, in addition to handwritten labels done in black ink. Incomprehensible, digitally distorted vocals play stereo tennis with David Tibet's slaps of vocal doom, which he carries out effortlessly like no one else can, states a member of progarchives.net. Before we continue with the list, if it's your first time here, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the little bell to turn on all notifications so you never miss a future video. Doing so helps the channel out a ton, and I'll see you around in the next video, my friend. Steam Drowning. Drowning. It's a fear all of us have. There is no argument that that has to be one of the worst ways to go out. And obviously, we'll never know what it truly feels like, as no one can tell the tale. Instead, let's take a look at the artist Steam. And real quick, I'm not actually sure if the artist name is Steam. That's what Google Translate said, but on rateyourmusic.com, the artist name is translated to car, so I'm not really sure. And their 4-track dark ambient and drone album, released on Bogus Collective back in March of 2019, titled Drowning. What I like to think of as an abstract approach towards the concept of one slowly fleeting this world, trapped under endless water. Each track is simply titled as a Roman numeral, the stages from beginning to end of this tragic way to go out. Although it may take mere seconds to finally lose your breath underwater, this release emphasizes the agony of how long I'm sure it would actually feel while it is happening. Track 1 and 4 are both 11 minutes and 22 seconds long, not sure if that means something, while the other 2 tracks clock in at around 6 and 10 minutes respectively. This album is pretty simple and grabs its eerie energy from its hopelessness, a vacancy of any help from other instruments besides these splashy drums and horns that constantly gasp for air. Every track sounds almost pretty much exactly the same. Most of you will find this to be another dark ambient album, but the idea of pushing an entire album through with seemingly the same sound is plain creepy. Diving into this release is a constant plunge into darkness as you fade further and further into the depths below, without even a light at your side. Daughters, You Won't Get What You Want. Stated by the internet's busiest music nerd as the most effectively terrifying album he's heard all decade, Rhode Island's Daughters dropped their fourth studio album, You Won't Get What You Want, back in October of 2018, a release more unfriendly than anything they've ever put out before. This album is a cluster of brilliantly placed industrial and noise rock with a personality bent on being unhinged and sinister, marking a significant departure from the band's earlier sound, which focused more on a traditional mathcore math rock sound, sucking you in like a black hole, piquing your curiosity ever so freakishly. You Won't Get What You Want explores our deepest, darkest curiosities with a wicked blend of scraping instrumentals, climatic, spearheaded breakdowns, all whipped up with some thrilling, yelping vocals. Many of the songs have so much going on at the same time, it sounds like this vicious tornado ripping up a defenseless town building by building. The energy comes right out the gate with the opening track, City Song, all the way to its drony organ soliloquy of an outro on the final track, Guest House. Oh, and nothing tickles my musical soul more than sudden drop-offs at the end of a song. The track title, The Flammable Man, doing this wonderfully just when the band finally gets you comfy in this head-banging groove, featuring a wicked guitar wrapping around the rest of the instruments with barbed wire sharpness. It eventually tugs too tight, leaving the song to snap and fall into utter silence. I highly recommend checking out Fantano's review of this thing. I love when Ant finds something he really likes. He's so good at breaking it down song by song, bit by bit, and he really pumps you up to listen to this thing more than I can ever do. I've personally never really listened to them, only finding out about them on his review actually. You Won't Get What You Want is truly a ride to be taken. Stalker. More dread lurking deep within Bandcamp's out-of-bounds territory, as I like to call it. Let's take a look at Stalker by an artist of the same name, which also seems to be an alias of their main name, Evening Disclosure. You know Bandcamp artists and their thousands of names. Conjuring up memories of a late-night stroll which you can't seem to remember if it actually happened or not, Stalker's short runtime of 5 tracks titled Figure, Shape, Pale, Hunt, and Prey tell the story of, you guessed it, someone being stalked. This story is told through harsh, malfunctioning finishes and touches on all of its instrumentals. All in all, it really is just some dark, noisy ambience, but it definitely feels spookier than a lot of other dark ambient out there in a charming way, especially around Halloween time. Feeling like an 80s slasher movie moving at 1000% slower speed, Stalking is the perfect Halloween background music to your Vaporwave themed party, let's say. Releasing other horror themed pieces like Empty Face, which features Michael Myers up front on the cover, we can see the love and dedication for horror flicks from Stalker, and this album is a fun way to explore a pretty horrific event in a musical sense, as weird as that sounds. Swans, Soundtracks for the Blind. Recorded over a period of 15 years before their freakishly long hiatus, Swans' 1996 Soundtracks for the Blind is an over 2-hour-long barrage of audio collages, but summing it up like that really doesn't do the album justice at all. This is an album that really deserves its own video, because it is so massive and hard to explain in only a couple of paragraphs, and not just massive due to its literal length, but because of its tightly packed, ripe presentation of years and years of different sounds the band created over time. A parade of everything they had saved up, where everything we looked at so far on this list seems to have a theme or motive and sticks with it vigorously. Soundtracks for the Blind is all over the place, and that's what makes it such a solid pick on this list for me. It is an example, an incredible example, of an album taking control of your emotions and having no problem shifting between two contrasting feelings of ethereal and doom. There are moments of pure angelic beauty on here, parts that are frightening, and every type of feeling in between those two polar opposites. But instead of harshly contrasting those two feelings back and forth, like a lot of other audio collage projects do, shifting gears out of nowhere to try and woo you with its instant musical shock, Everything on Soundtracks for the Blind always seems to like build up and build up, only to lead to a drop off for the music to climb its way back up again, each time perhaps with a different feeling or tone. The album is constantly retexturizing and expanding itself over its runtime. It's always on the move, with an abundant amount of sounds and recordings to overwhelming instrumentals compiled by the band itself. I really can't go that deep into the album and start breaking it down song by song because, well, we'll be here forever. While researching this album for this countdown, I found an incredible review on YouTube by The Music Breakdown is the name of the channel. I highly recommend you check it out. He does a splendid job breaking down the different sections of the piece, and you can really tell by this dude's emotions just how much the album and band means to its fans. I've never really listened to much of Swans, but this seems like an overpowering piece I definitely need to sit through when I find the time. This extremely powerful and enormous project is daunting to approach. Its sheer ferociousness and emotion-bending power easily puts it on this list for me. William Basinski, The Disintegration Loops. Considered to be one of the greatest, most brilliant ambient pieces ever recorded by mankind. I'm not joking, this thing is renowned, and with good reason. Let's take a look at William Basinski's The Disintegration Loops, 4 albums released between 2002 and 2003, consisting of almost 5 hours worth of mesmerizing ambient drone. These recordings consist of 20-something-year-old tape loops that were gradually deteriorated each and every time Basinski passed them through the tape head during production, an accident of sorts when Basinski attempted to transfer his earlier recordings to digital format. Doing so equipped these recordings with a worn-out, flaky, and decayed texture. Basinski's number one tool with this thing is time. The concept of time, how all things must decay, eventually rot and leave its once fruitful and animated state. That decaying takes a life of its own on this musical masterpiece, certain sections of the disintegration loops warping longer than others, certain sounds and instruments long to resurface from their aging fate, trying to climb out of the compiled musical debris. However, they leave nothing but an elongated moan, or almost a muted cry for help. It's a beautiful tragedy that is so rich and warm. The recording process, when looked under a magnifying glass, reveals the millions of delicate threads binding together these loops piled endlessly on top of one another, where if even a speck of dust floats between them, I feel like it'll just poof into smoke. The artwork for the Disintegration Loops is a photo Basinski took from his rooftop in Brooklyn during the 9/11 attacks. It shows the aftermath of the World Trade Center's collapse as a shroud of gray, dusty smoke engulfs the city in its horrifying clutch. This photo is just stunning. It's a reminder to me that life goes on. The tragedies we may have faced in the past will always slowly disperse and eventually defog, revealing a new world we must now better. Basinski dedicates the Disintegration Loops to all of the victims who lost their lives on 9/11. For further understanding of the album and its history, I highly recommend you check out a video called September 11 and the Accidental Godfather of Vaporwave by the YouTuber Harrison Engstrom. At just over 2,000 views, this video is extremely underrated due to its extensively detailed way of telling the story of the Disintegration Loops. The Disintegration Loops were initially released in 4 parts and was reissued in 2012 on its 10th anniversary as a 9 LP box set. If you haven't listened to this thing yet, I hope you really do. Dedicate a couple hours to yourself sometime in the near future to give this thing the time it deserves. The Residents, Not Available. Not Available by the avant-garde experimental group known as The Residents is an album that always conjures up quite a debate between its fans. Many consider it to be one of their most terrifying, yet beautiful music releases, while others find it to simply fall flat compared to their earlier works. Recorded in 1974 but released in 1978, Not Available comes at us in 4 pieces, a disorienting, unsure of itself narrative with a multitude of broken, pancaking instrumentals and melodies, all piling up into this blurry rainbow mountain of sounds. Not Available is confusing for someone like me. I mean, maybe it's because I just don't really get it. I've never really listened to this stuff before, and because of that, however, as someone from the outside of this avant-prog, abstract rock opera vibe, or whatever it is, and only looking in, It feels like the album knows something that I don't. Its fans know something that I don't, and I love that idea. It's all some puzzle I just don't have the tools to crack into, as I can only watch it shapeshift and morph between a glass pane I plopped my face onto. It's the only thing separating myself and the proper answer to this music. Time and time again, we find lacks of harmony on here, notes sweated out from beaten instrumentals, sounds running back and forth between the foreground and background, all concluding into an eruptive hammering of stress vocals in the end. The album also has quite a backstory behind its conception that makes it all that much more mystifying. It's though the record has this forbidden sense of lost media to it. Let me explain. So the release of Not Available was to be focused on practicing the theory of obscurity, which states that an artist can only produce pure art when the expectations and influences of the outside world are not taken into consideration. Because of this, even though the album was recorded in 1974 and was clearly ready to go, the album was immediately locked away in a bank vault with no plans to issue it until the members of the band have completely forgotten about its existence. It did, however, surface in 1978 due to continued delays on their record Eskimo and not having any material to put out. Between the years 1978 all the way up to 2011, the band has released Not Available in a variety of ways, all with a different track list. Like I said, I find it terrifying when an album seems to know more than I do, and with the nature of this unpredictable way of releasing the music, who knows if somehow the residents have more music locked up that will never see the light of day for years and years to come. The Caretaker. Everywhere at the end of time. Close your eyes and imagine yourself in a maritime ballroom. It's the 1920s, or at least you think it is, and you've been out at sea for maybe over 15 years now on this gigantic boat, vacant of any sort of color but pasty blues, charcoal grays, and dulled whites. This massive ship has everything you could ever possibly want in it, really. It has shops, theaters, fine dining, and even wineries. But you've never been in any of them. Day by day, the ship makes its way through dark oceans and cloudy skies, and although the ship seems to be a fully functioning system, you have found yourself to be the only one stationed on this boat. You don't remember how you got here, what your name is. Better yet, you don't even know what the concept of a name is. There are no workers on here, no management to be seen, not one other living thing on this boat but you. The ship is very dark. Most hallways are nothing but a black blur you best not go down. So you mostly find yourself frequenting the friendlier looking part of the ship, the top deck, and this ballroom that seems to get the most natural light in it from the large windows it's made out of. So you found some sort of comfort by staying in here. You haven't seen a single soul in years. You think other people exist, but you've never really been sure. They have to, right? Your skin has not felt the skin of another human being in God knows how long, or maybe you haven't even met anybody yet. You wonder what the slightest hum coming from someone else's voice could sound like, but at this point, you're so very used to this idea that you just don't know, and memories are fleeing every single day from your mind, so you brush it off. Every day seems to get cloudier and more confusing, and although you don't feel hunger, you are never tired, you do feel like something is decaying. Each and every day, the screws are becoming more and more loose. For every day that passes, something, you're not sure what, loses its existence, washed away from your fragile memories. There is one thing, however. Yes, one thing definitely does exist. Music. The music. The never-ending music following you into each area of the ship. And if you ever wanted to wonder what that music would sound like, say hello to Everywhere at the End of Time by The Caretaker. This 6-stage musical voyage by James Leyland Kirby is an ambient project that stretches on for over 6 hours in its entirety, created during the years of 2016 to 2019. His work under the Caretaker moniker has been characterized as exploring memory and the gradual deterioration of it. On Everywhere at the End of Time, a progression from blissful ballroom jingles, the crackling of an old record player, tubas, trumpets, and other horns crooning in the night looking for a mate, the bouncing piano notes without a care in the world, basking in the warm, fuzzy filters Kirby glazes the earlier parts of the album on will eventually start to decay and rot. There is this ominous transition between stage 3 and 4 of Everywhere at the End of Time that signifies to you the rest of your time here will not be pleasant. Kirby diagnosed the project with Alzheimer's disease, and it's almost like every minute that goes by, the album itself forgets what music even is. Stages 4, 5, and 6 get foggier, darker, as you struggle to pick up any sort of concept that makes sense to you, as broken fragments of what music used to be now lays motionless on the ground, struggling to get its last breaths out before its final demise. Even as early as stage 2, we can begin to see the early signs of its downfall, and because of its massive runtime, you're always thinking to yourself, just how much deeper and how much sadder can it all possibly get to? Kirby makes old songs sound even older, an intense rich and warmness to the earlier moments of the album that'll really make you feel like you're listening to this thing in an old, haunted ballroom, eventually leading to this collection of sound that makes you feel like you're swimming deeper and deeper into the darkest corners of your mind, forever sealing away your memories and conscious thoughts that you can never go back to. And like I said, you always start thinking to yourself, when can this possibly end? How much deeper can it go? And then you look at how much time left you got on the album, and you're only 2 hours and 45 minutes in. When deciding what albums to put on the list for this video, I kept getting suggestions to put this behemoth on it. I've heard of the Caretaker before, but never really listened to any of Kirby's works. So when I saw 6 hours worth of total music to soak in, I thought why not just bring in some really decent headphones to my office job and crush this thing out in one whole workday. Ironically, I don't think in my entire life have I ever been so productive in a single workday. I found myself completely disconnected from my actual body and soul. I work a very mundane graphic design job in real life, and not that it's bad or anything, but the work can get pretty tedious after a while. And just listening to this thing, I don't know, it put me in this sort of workflow trance I don't think I've ever felt before. I forgot others were even in the workplace with me. The Caretaker seemed to carelessly drag me out of the real world and into a mindset that doesn't use my mind at all. I just worked, and it was weird. The entire masterclass ends on the track Place in the World Fades Away, a continual drone-like substance, the album's last long breath of life until it concludes and fades away. Kirby brings to life the horrors of Alzheimer's in a way that has never been captured truly in audio form, ever. When work began on this series, it was difficult to predict how the music would unravel itself. Dementia is an emotive subject for many, and always a subject I have treated with maximum respect. Stages have all been artistic reflections of specific symptoms which can be common with the progression and advancement of the different forms of Alzheimer's. Thanks always for your support of this series of works, remembered by the Caretaker. What are some of the creepiest, most disturbing musical projects, albums, or songs you can think of? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to drop a like on this video if you want to see me do similar countdowns like this in the future, and like I said earlier, hit that subscribe button to never miss out on what's coming up next. Thanks for watching, my friend. Much love. Your boy, Pad Chennington.